The language families of Europe. So this is going to be the start of a new series of videos I'm doing, and it's going to be a little bit different to the ones I've done before, but basically I'm going to be unpacking the languages of Europe. So there's a map of Europe down the bottom. You can see all the names of the countries. We're basically going to be going over what language family inhabits Europe. I'm going to basically give you an explanation of language families and what they are, and talk a little bit about how they're related and all that kind of thing. So just getting straight into it. Of the 744 million people that live in Europe, 94 of them speak an Indo-European language as a primary language, so their native language. And what an Indo-European language is, I'll probably make another video on this, but basically languages are divided into groups based on what they have in common, and the 6 main language groups are, I'm not going to say them all to you, but Indo-European is the biggest of them. So English is part of that, and plenty of other languages. You know, if you're thinking of a European language like Spanish, for example, it's probably in it. So they do make up the dominant language family in the world, and especially in Europe, because it's 94% of people. So the EU, if you don't know, is the European Union, which is basically an organisation of a bunch of countries in Europe. I'm not sure exactly how many, but they recognise 24 official languages in Europe. So that's Bulgarian, Croatian, Czech, Danish, Dutch, English, Estonian, Finnish, French, German, Greek, Hungarian, Irish, Italian, Latvian, Lithuanian, Maltese, Polish, Portuguese, Romanian, Slovak, Slovenian, Spanish, and Swedish. Those are the 24 that are officially recognised. However, there's over 250 languages native to Europe. And obviously, people still speak them and stuff, but these are just the 24 most important and influential ones. So there probably won't be any documents not written in these languages as far as passing laws and stuff go. As you can see, some of them are in grey: Estonian, Finnish, and Hungarian. They're actually Uralic. So I've coloured the ones that aren't Indo-European because it's easier than colouring the ones that are. There's just too many. So those 3 in grey are Uralic languages. They've got their own slide later on, but they're not Indo-European, even though they're from Europe, which is weird. You might think Finnish is kind of like Swedish and stuff, so it should be the same. It's a bit different. I'll explain that later. And there's also Maltese, which I've coloured orange. It's an Afro-Asiatic language, so it's also not an Indo-European thing. It's in its own family, its own big family, which would get its own video in the Africa one, but because it's in Europe and it's part of the EU, I'm just going to put it in this one. And it's spoken in Malta, which is joined the EU. I'll talk about that later. So how do these Indo-European languages break down? So the biggest language family in the world, has 448 languages and 3.3 billion speakers across mostly Europe is where it's spoken, but also the Americas, Oceania, and parts of Asia as well. I'll talk about, as you can see a few dot points lower, I'll talk about why it's spread so much from Europe, even though it's a European language family. So it's one of the most important, it's not one of the most, it's the most important and influential. So English is the language of the sky. If you didn't know, it's used for aviation purposes, so all pilots have to learn English in the world, apart from potentially North Korea, I don't know, but presumably they all have to learn English. And I think even for domestic flights within their own country, they still try and use English a lot of the time. They don't always, but it's mandatory for international flights. This is to avoid any kind of collisions or any confusion like that. And then English and Russian are the languages of space. So all English and Russian are both Indo-European languages. The next slide is going to basically have a list of all of the languages and their subfamilies, but they're the languages of space. So astronauts are expected, American astronauts, for example, are expected to have some degree of Russian proficiency if they're going to go work on the ISS, which is the International Space Station. So it's very, very important and influential. Indo-European languages have historically expanded throughout the world due to colonialism. So basically, the reason they're spoken in everywhere around the world is generally, there's 2 reasons. The historical reason is colonialism. So countries in Europe have gone to places like North America, South America, Oceania, parts of Africa and Asia to basically kind of take over that land, and as a result their language is now spoken there. And then the modern reason, the second reason, is because of everyone has access to technology. So most media produced is in Indo-European languages, primarily English, and all this other things are created in Indo-European languages. So that's the modern reason. So they're both equally as important, but they're just 2 different contributors to why it's so influential throughout the world and in space, technically. So all Indo-European languages have descended from a hypothetical language. So Proto-Indo-European is not an actual language that's ever been spoken, that we know how to speak, but it's a hypothetical language that would have existed, because the reason they're considered in a family is because they have stuff in common. So if you trace back, you would find a common ancestor, and then as the people who speak that language move away from each other, stuff gradually changes until they become separate languages. So anyone who has seen Spanish and Italian, you'll know they're very similar, and there's actually a lot of things that are the same. They have an overlap. So what that would have been is hundreds or thousands of years ago, they would have been the same language, and then two groups of people would have split up speaking that language, and as you move apart, they change their own stuff until they become two different languages. And you can see that now with English. Like if you look at Americans versus Australians versus English people, they speak the language slightly different. Obviously, it's still the same language because it's not that different. But if we kept moving apart with no connection, eventually they probably would become their own languages after hundreds or thousands of years. They're also native to Europe, these languages, hence the name Indo-European, and the Iranian Plateau and North India, the North Indian subcontinent. That's where the Indo comes through. You might think it's weird that Indian and European languages are related. Again, that's kind of due to people moving around on the planet, but they are related. So, how do they classify it? So as far as the language family goes, it is further divided into branches. So they're not all, it's not just Indo-European languages and they're nothing else. So within the Indo-European family, you've probably heard of Romance languages. So French, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, Romanian, and Catalan is less spoken. They're basically languages that are descended from Vulgar Latin, which was spoke in Rome, I believe. I'm not a history expert, I'm doing my best. But yeah, those languages all have something in common because they're descended from Vulgar Latin, and if you've studied any of them, you'll know they have a lot in common. They're generally considered to be pretty easy, and yeah, they're written with the Latin alphabet, so the same as English. You've got Germanic languages. English is actually one of them. You can see it in the middle. So you've got Germanic, Bavarian, Swiss, English, Saxon, Dutch, Swedish, Danish, Norwegian, Icelandic, and Afrikaans. Those Germanic languages can be further divided into North Germanic, which, I'm going to have to do this from memory. There's North Germanic, West Germanic. They divide up a little bit. English is more similar to... Ooh, that's a tough one. I might have to look that up real quick. Give me 1 sec, I've got my phone. I can't remember from memory how they divide up. So, let's just look this up. Some people think Germanic languages are the easiest to learn because English is one. That does have some truth in it, but there's a few things that make it a little bit more difficult. There we go, if the internet's actually working on my phone. Okay, so we've got Germanic languages are divided into West Germanic, which is English, German, and Dutch. North Germanic, which is Danish, Swedish, Icelandic, Norwegian, those kind of like, Scandinavian languages from the northern countries, and East Germanic, which is now extinct apparently, so I'm not quite sure where the rest of them fit in, sorry, I didn't have that prepared. Afrikaans is spoken in South Africa, again, due to colonialism, it's spoken so far away from Europe. I think it's considered, let me look that up, West Germanic language as well, so it would be similar to English, and Afrikaans is really easy, same with Dutch. Then you've got Hellenic. The only one, I think, there used to be more, but the only one still not extinct is Greek, modern Greek, which is spoken in Greece, obviously. It's a pretty fun language to learn. The alphabet isn't too hard if you just want to learn that and not commit to the whole language. I've done it, but yeah, it is pretty cool. Celtic languages, so they aren't spoken too much anymore, but you've got Scottish and Irish Gaelic, which is spoken in Scotland and Ireland still. Obviously, English is largely spoken there now, but there are still communities who speak this as a... I don't know if they learn it as a first language, but they can speak it, and I think it's recognised. I know in Scottish Parliament people have spoken it just because now it's recognised, so they just do that for fun. Then you've got Welsh as well, spoken in Wales. Breton, which is a language spoken on the island, what's it called? Brittany in France, sorry, which is a part of France. I'm not 100% sure the history of it, but it's spoken there. They're all spoken around the UK, and then you've got Cornish, which is spoken in Cornwall, and Manx. Cornish and Manx are what's called revived languages because they were previously dead, and they've been, basically, with information about them, they've kind of been revived, so people are being taught them again and trying to speak them again. Cornish is spoken in Cornwall. Manx is spoken in a place called the Isle of Man, which is between kind of the Great Britain island and the Irish island. If you know what the UK looks like, I don't know what the terminology is for the island, sorry, but it's kind of a tiny island in there that falls under, I think, UK rule. But yeah, Manx is a revived language as well that's spoken there by not many people. I think maybe like 200, so it's really small. You've got Slavic languages. You've probably heard of Russian, Ukrainian, most of these languages have that kind of Russian alphabet. It's called Cyrillic. It's modified. It's kind of similar to the English/Latin alphabet, and it has some elements from the Greek one as well, and it even has a tiny bit from the Korean one. If you know the alphabet, you know what I'm talking about. But it can be quite intimidating. It's really not too hard. It's probably the easiest language to learn, kind of neck and neck with Greek for how hard it is to understand, but it is 33 letters, so it's a little bit more to learn. But yeah, Russian, Ukrainian, Polish, Slovak, Czech, Croatian, Serbian, and Bulgarian are Slavic languages kind of spoken more in Eastern Europe. And then you've got Indo-Iranian. This is where it gets interesting, because generally when you think of European languages, you think of like English, French, German, that kind of stuff. But a lot of it, these languages are actually closely related to some Middle Eastern languages as well. So you've got Persian, which is also known as Farsi. It's spoken in Iran, Afghanistan, and potentially, well, not potentially, it's definitely spoken elsewhere as well. I'm just not sure all of the countries. If I had to learn every single thing about every single language, I'd never make this video, and I'd have like a dictionary full of notes in front of me. So this is kind of mostly from memory. I have a few notes next to me right now. But Persian, Pashto, I think it might be spoken, I'm not 100% sure. I'm not going to say India because I'm not confident enough. Kurdish is spoken in Iraq, and it uses the Arabic script, so does Persian. So if you didn't know anything about them, you'd see that, and then you just assume it was Arabic, because that's what everyone in Western countries does, basically. Kashmiri and Maldivian. Indo-Iranian is spoken, I believe, around the Iranian, we talked about that earlier, the Iranian Peninsula. And then you've got Indo-Aryan, which is a Bengali and Hindi, which Hindi is obviously the primary language of India. India actually has 22 languages, if you didn't know, the second most common of which is English. So they have tons, 22 standard languages, that is. They have way more I don't know what the word is, legally recognised, maybe, non-official languages. And you've got Gujarati and Urdu. I believe Urdu is spoken in Pakistan, but I'm not 100% sure. But yeah, those are... It's interesting that these kind of Indian languages would be included, but they are a part of this family. They're actually more closely related to English than Finnish would be, I believe. Obviously, that's a bit different now because Finnish uses the Latin alphabet and probably has a lot more influence from English. But yeah, historically, the way they've been classified in these families, it's interesting that Hindi is more related to English than Finnish. But moving on, you've got Baltic languages, which is Lithuanian and Latvian. They're two countries very close together below Estonia in Eastern Europe. I don't know a lot about Baltic languages. Baltic and Slavic languages are related because they're actually classified into Balto-Slavic. I've just further divided them into Baltic and Slavic. So they do have a lot in common with, or a lot more in common with Russian, Ukrainian stuff than English would, for example. You've got Albanian, which is, I believe, in its own family. Albania is a language. Albania is a country in Southern Europe. Don't know a lot about that one either. And then you've got Anatolian, which is those two languages there. It's currently extinct, and Tocharian, which is interesting, or Tocharian, I'm just going to call it Tocharian, which was spoken in Western China but is now completely extinct. So I think the difference between completely extinct and currently extinct, completely extinct would mean that, obviously I've made a video on this before, explaining if you want to look into that more, but extinct is where there's no primary or secondary speakers, so no one speaks it, and I think no one would really have any interest in learning it or be really trying to. And then currently extinct, I'm not 100% sure what the difference would be between that, but I think currently extinct would be, it'd be a little bit less extreme than completely extinct. That seems pretty obvious saying that out loud, so I'm not sure about that one. You can look that one up if you want. Okay. Other non-Indo-European languages. So, as I mentioned before, Finnish, Estonian, and Hungarian are Uralic. So, it's a minor language family outside that of Indo-European. If you look up Indo-European languages right now, there will be a picture of a tree in one of the first images, and it will have off to the side a little tree with the Uralic languages. That's kind of how it works. So, they're supposedly descended from the Ural Mountains, which is, I believe, in modern-day Russia. So, Finnish, Estonian, and Hungarian are the three most popular. Hungarian, I think, is 60% of Uralic language speakers, but there are plenty of other Uralic languages as well. How many have I written down? 42, spoken by 25 million people. So that means more than 13 million people speak Hungarian, just mathematically, because 60%, as I said before. And they're spoken by people across Europe and North Asia, obviously, because Russia is a transcontinental country. It's massive. So yeah, that's basically Uralic languages. I'm not going to do a whole video on them because it's not that interesting, I think, and there's not that much to talk about. But basically, yeah, that's it. And Maltese, which was the other language, is considered an EU language because they joined the EU in 2003. Malta, that is, which is, if you've seen a small country below Italy, that is Malta. I think it's quite hard to see because I think it might be an archipelago. I'm not 100% sure of what it looks like on a map. It's not Sicily. That's to the west. Malta is south of Italy. But yeah, they joined the EU, and that's why it's considered a European language. Sorry. There are plenty of other minor languages not within. What was I talking about? I'm not sure why that's there. Maybe it has to do with Uralic languages, but I already said that. Sorry. But yeah, just to close, so Indo-European language family is the most influential and important language family in the world, and probably will ever be, because it would take a long time for all of them to die out and change. And if you speak English, which you presumably do, you're one of its 3.3 billion speakers. That flag on the right is not an official flag. I just found it as a flag someone made for Indo-European languages, and I thought it was cool because it's got the kind of colours right and the stars, and it's got the India thing in the middle. I'm not sure what that's called, sorry. But yeah, that's basically it. I think it's quite interesting, and I will try and make more of these videos, kind of like not reviewing per se, but looking over the languages and kind of explaining how they're classified, because I think it is really interesting to look at how they're related in the different branches if you're interested in languages, and it does kind of show how they flow into each other and which languages are more similar and that kind of thing. So if you're looking to learn languages similar to each other to try and learn as quickly and as many as possible, that thing we had back there where they're classified is going to be your best bet. So if you want to learn Germanic languages, for example, if you're interested in Germanic languages over Romance languages, you would want to learn like German, Dutch, Danish, all the kind of West Germanic languages that are more similar, as I explained. So yeah, that can be really helpful, and then obviously it classifies the rest of them. I didn't really talk about how many people speak them as well. I should probably do that real quick. So Romance languages, Germanic languages, Slavic languages, Indo-Iranian and Indo-Aryan, those 5 I just mentioned, are spoken by lots of people. So I'm not 100% sure which one is spoken by the most people, but as you can imagine, India and the Middle East, there's a lot of people there. So there's a lot of people speaking those languages. I think Iran has, how many millions of people? Way more than Australia. It might be like double or not quite. And then India obviously has over 1 billion people. So there's plenty of people speaking those languages. Germany, 80 million. France is about 70 million, I think. Spanish is interesting because in Europe there's actually less Spanish speakers than Italian, but worldwide, because you've got Mexico, parts of the Americas, South America, I think maybe even parts of Africa, they have way more speakers than any of these other Romance languages, which is interesting. But yeah, those 5 are spoken by a lot of people. Celtic's kind of dying out. Anything with only one language, obviously like about Albanian or Greek, is running out as well. Slavic, Russian's like, I think, the 3rd most spoken language on the internet, and obviously there's a lot of people living in those countries. There's like 130 million people in Russia. So yeah, and obviously the 2 at the bottom are extinct, so they have no speakers by definition. But yeah, that's basically it. For those looking to learn a language as well, I will have a link in the description to Head of State Language Learning website. It's completely free and it will definitely help you. Currently it is under maintenance, but basically it's designed to combat any language learning problems. So it has a list of resources on every single language, or almost all of them you could want to learn. Most of the ones in that, probably not most of them, there's too many of them, but a lot of the ones in that list. And yeah, it's got the order of the things in which I think you should learn them. So if you just don't know what to do, you would go to the website, click on your language, it'll tell you what to learn first, what to learn second, and you just go through, click on the links to learn everything until you get to the end and you've learned the whole language. And yeah, it's completely free, so there's no reason really why you wouldn't do it. But yeah, that's basically it. I would appreciate it if you liked and subscribed. It would really help the channel, and thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed.